minutes. Then get Thompson. Thompson there for 2 minutes. Only Anna. Anna. Can he do it here? He's at our belt.
Take it to goal.
He gets the goal of his lifetime. As 3 dead now on.
Kinsa maning sigjat eh. Mura man tag na yun. Wa ba ya?
JC, can I ask you a favor? Pwede ikaw mag-collect ng data about biogeochemical cycles? I know you can do it. Deadline maya 12 a.m. Thank you!
Alright, the next topic is biogeochemical cycles. At first, when you look at this term biogeochemical, it sounds very hi-fi and fancy. But if you break the word biogeochemical, it's nothing but the chemical exchange between
JC?
Hi, I'm Jessa, a science enthusiast, and I heard kasi that you needed some help about science stuff, so here I am.
Oh, nice. Can I ask you about biogeochemical cycles? Gisugo mo gud ko sa mo leader.
Oh, yeah, sure. Listen. Energy flows directionally through Earth's ecosystems, typically entering in the form of sunlight and exiting in the form of heat. However, the chemical components that make up living organisms are different. They get recycled. The term biogeochemical is derived from bio, meaning biosphere, geo, meaning the geological components, and chemical, meaning the elements that move through a cycle. The matter on Earth is conserved and present in the form of atoms. Since matter can neither be created nor destroyed, it is recycled in the Earth's system in various forms. The 6 most common elements in organic molecules, carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur, take a variety of chemical forms. They may be stored for a long or short periods in the atmosphere, on land, in water, or beneath the Earth's surface, as well as in the bodies of living organisms. Biogeochemical cycles are basically divided into 2 types: gaseous cycles and sedimentary cycles. Gaseous cycles include carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and the water cycle. Sedimentary cycles include sulfur, phosphorus, rock cycle, and etc. These elements are recycled through the biotic and abiotic components of the ecosystem. The atmosphere, hydrosphere, and lithosphere are the abiotic components of the ecosystem. Now, let us first discuss the oxygen cycle. Oxygen cycle, along with the carbon cycle and nitrogen cycle, plays an essential role in the existence of life on the Earth. The oxygen cycle is a biological process which helps in maintaining the oxygen level by moving through 3 main spheres of the Earth, which are atmosphere, lithosphere, biosphere. This biogeochemical process, or cycle, explains the movement of oxygen gas within the atmosphere, the ecosystem, biosphere, and the lithosphere. The oxygen cycle is interconnected with the carbon cycle. The atmosphere is the layer of gases present above the Earth's surface. The sum of Earth's Ecosystems make a biosphere. Lithosphere is the solid outer section along with the Earth's crust, and it is the largest reservoir of oxygen. There are 3 stages involved in the oxygen cycle. The first step starts from the plants. All green plants, during the process of photosynthesis, release oxygen back into the atmosphere as a byproduct. The second step happens when animals and plants breathe oxygen for respiration. The third step happens when animals exhale carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is again used by the plants during photosynthesis. Now, oxygen is balanced within the atmosphere. Production of oxygen. The leading creators of oxygen are plants by the process of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a biological process by which all green plants synthesize their food in the presence of sunlight. During photosynthesis, plants use sunlight, water, carbon dioxide to create energy, and oxygen gas is liberated as a byproduct of this process. Sunlight also produces oxygen. Some oxygen gas is produced when the sunlight reacts with water vapor in the atmosphere. Now, let us proceed to the carbon cycle. Carbon cycle is the process where carbon compounds are interchanged among the biosphere, geosphere, pedosphere, hydrosphere, and atmosphere of the Earth. It is one of the biogeochemical cycles in which carbon is exchanged among the biosphere, geosphere, hydrosphere, atmosphere, and pedosphere. All green plants use carbon dioxide and sunlight for photosynthesis. Carbon thus stored in the plant. The green plants, when dead, are buried into the soil that gets converted into fossil fuels made from carbon. These fossil fuels, when burnt, release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Also, the animals that consume plants obtain the carbon stored in the plants. This carbon is returned to the atmosphere when these animals decompose after death. The carbon also returns to the environment through cellular respiration by animals. Huge carbon content in the form of carbon dioxide is produced that is stored in the form of fossil fuel and can be extracted from various commercial and non-commercial purposes. When factories use these fuels, the carbon is again released back in the atmosphere during combustion. So, what have you learned so far, JC?
I've learned a lot, Jessa, and I have observed that carbon and oxygen cycles are intertwined with one another.
Now, sleep.
Oh, kinsa naman sad ka?
Silly, what are you talking about? I'm Jessa. You know, the other Jessa. So, anyway, enough of that. Let's learn together. First, the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen cycle is a repeating cycle of processes during which nitrogen moves through both living and non-living things, the atmosphere, soil, water, plants, animals, and bacteria. In order to move through the different parts of the cycle, nitrogen must change forms. In the atmosphere, nitrogen exists as a gas or the N2, but in the soil, it exists as nitrogen oxide or the NO and nitrogen dioxide or the NO2. And when used as a fertilizer, it can be found in any other forms such as ammonia, NH3, which can be processed even further into a different fertilizer, which is the ammonium nitrate or the NH4NO3. There are 5 stages in the nitrogen cycle, and we will now discuss each of them: the fixation, mineralization, nitrification, immobilization, and denitrification. The first stage is the fixation. In this stage, nitrogen moves from the atmosphere into the soil. Fixation converts nitrogen in the atmosphere into forms that plants can absorb through their root systems. Actually, the atmospheric nitrogen cannot be used directly by plants and animals. Nitrogen needs to get converted to nitrogenous compounds. This is also called nitrogen fixation. This also can occur by lightning strikes. Nitrogen is fixed or combined in nature as nitric oxide by lightning and ultraviolet rays. But more significant amounts of nitrogen are fixed as ammonia, nitrites, and nitrates by soil microorganisms. More than 90% of all nitrogen fixation is affected by them. The second stage is the mineralization. This stage takes place in the soil. Nitrogen moves from organic materials such as manure or plant materials to an inorganic form of nitrogen that plants can use. Eventually, the plant's nutrients are used up and the plant dies and decomposes. This becomes important in the second stage of the nitrogen cycle. Mineralization happens when microbes act on organic material such as animal manure or decomposing plant or animal and begin to convert it to a form of nitrogen that can be used by plants. The next stage is the nitrification. This is a biological process of converting ammonium into nitrate. The process of nitrification is important to plants as it produces an extra stash of available nitrogen that can be absorbed by the plants through their root systems. Nitrosomas are the group of specialized bacteria involved in the process of converting ammonia into nitrates. Nitrosomas is a genus of gram-negative rod-shaped chemoautotrophic bacteria are the involved bacteria in this process. The growth is also prolonged. The next stage of the nitrogen cycle is the immobilization. Sometimes it described as the reverse of mineralization. Just like plants, microorganisms living in the soil require nitrogen as an energy source. These soil microorganisms pull nitrogen from the soil when the residues of decomposing plants do not contain enough nitrogen. However, immobilization is important because it helps control and balance the amount of nitrogen in the soil by tying it up or immobilizing the nitrogen in microorganisms. The last process of the nitrogen cycle is the denitrification. This is a biological process of converting nitrate into nitrogen gas. The process is fast compared to nitrification. Denitrification is the final step in the nitrogen cycle. The nitrogen fixed through nitrogen fixation is returned to the atmosphere as nitrogen gas. Thus, it helps to balance the amount of nitrogen in the ecosystems. Nitrogen returns to the air as nitrates are converted to atmospheric nitrogen or the N2 by bacteria through the process we call the denitrification. This results in an overall loss of nitrogen from soils as the gaseous form of nitrogen moves into the atmosphere. Pollution of our water sources by surplus nitrogen and other nutrients is a huge problem, as marine life is being suffocated from decomposition of dead algae blooms. Comparison of nitrification and denitrification is that in nitrogen, nitrate, the byproduct of the nitrification process, is rich in nitrogen and is a rich source for plant growth and development. And on the other way around, denitrification involves on the best process used in wastewater treatment by removing nitrogen from sewage and other municipal wastewater. This biological process also supports aquatic life. Isn't it amazing? These processes involves nitrogen, deals with the life and sustainability of plants. If you're amazed, I have more to go for you to learn. The next cycle that we will talk about is the phosphorus cycle. It is a biogeochemical process that involves the movement of phosphorus through the lithosphere, hydrosphere, and biosphere. Phosphorus is an essential nutrient found in the macromolecules of humans and other organisms, including the DNA. Phosphorus is often the limiting nutrient or nutrient that is most scarce and thus limits growth in aquatic ecosystem. When nitrogen and phosphorus from fertilizer are carried in runoff to lakes and oceans, they can cause eutrophication, which is the overgrowth of algae. The algae may deplete oxygen from the water and create a dead zone. Most fertilizers used in agriculture and on lawns and gardens contain both nitrogen and phosphorus, which may be carried to aquatic ecosystems in surface runoff. Fertilizer carried in runoff may cause excessive growth of algae or other microbes that were previously limited by nitrogen or phosphorus. This phenomenon is called eutrophication. At least in some cases, phosphorus, not nitrogen, seems to be the main driver of eutrophication. Regions of lakes and oceans that are depleted of oxygen due to a nutrient influx are called dead zones. The number of dead zones has increased for several years, and more than 400 of these zones existed in year 2008. How can eutrophication be reduced or prevented? Fertilizers, phosphorus-containing detergents, and improperly disposed of sewage can all be sources of nitrogen and phosphorus that drive eutrophication. Using less fertilizer, eliminating phosphorus-containing detergents, and ensuring that sewage does not enter waterways is the most efficient way to prevent eutrophication. Phosphorus moves in a cycle through rocks, water, soil, and sediments and organisms. Over time, rain and weathering cause rocks to release phosphate ions and other minerals. This inorganic phosphate is then distributed in soils and water. Plants take up inorganic phosphate from the soil. The plants may then be consumed by animals. Once in the plant or animal, the phosphate is incorporated into organic molecules such as DNA. When the plant or animal dies, it decays and the organic phosphate is returned to the soil. Within the soil, organic forms of phosphate can be made available to plants by bacteria that break down organic matter to inorganic forms of phosphorus. This process is known as mineralization. Phosphorus in soil can end up in waterways and eventually oceans. Once there, it can be incorporated into sediments over time. Following the important steps of phosphorus cycle, weathering, that is why the phosphorus cycle starts in the Earth's crust. The phosphate salts are broken down from the rocks. These salts are washed away into the ground where they mix in the soil. Second is the absorption by plants. The phosphate salts dissolved in water are absorbed by the plants. However, the amount of phosphorus present in the soil is very less. This is why the farmers apply phosphate fertilizers on agricultural land. Third is that absorption by animals. The animals absorb phosphorus from the plants or by consuming plant-eating animals. The rate of the phosphorus cycle is faster in plants and animals when compared to rocks. Fourth is the return to the environment through decomposition. When the plants and animals die, they are decomposed by microorganisms. During this process, the organic form of phosphorus is converted into the inorganic form, which is recycled to soil and water. Soil and water will end up in sediments and rocks, which will again release phosphorus by weathering. Thus, phosphorus cycle starts over again. Do you know that in this process it is crucial because it is an essential nutrient for the sustaining of life on Earth, for the transfer of energy within organisms, and also the genetic material? Although it evolves in many cycles, or should I say processes, yet the phosphorus cycle made possible through the human influences over months or years. The next cycle that will be discussed is about the water cycle. As we all know, water is the most abundant key ingredients on Earth. mostly 3/4. Water cycle is the path where all water follows as it moves around the earth in different states. When molecules of water vapor return to liquid or solid form, they create cloud droplets that can fall back to the earth as rain or snow, a process called condensation. Most precipitation lands in the oceans. Precipitation that falls onto land flows into rivers, streams, and lakes. Some of it seeps into the soil where it is held underground as groundwater. When warmed by the sun, water on the surface of oceans and freshwater bodies evaporates, forming a vapor. Water vapor rises into the atmosphere, where it condenses, forming clouds, and then it falls back to the ground as precipitation. Moisture can also enter the atmosphere directly from ice or snow. In a process called sublimation, solid water such as ice or snow can transform directly into water vapor without first becoming a liquid. For the next cycle, which is the sulfur cycle, it is a circulation of sulfur in various forms through nature. Sulfur occurs in all living organisms or matter as a component of certain amino acids. It is abundant in the soil in proteins and through a series of microbial transformations ends up as sulfates usable by plants. Sulfur is released into the atmosphere by the burning of fossil fuels, organic activities, and the composition of organic molecules. On land, sulfur is stored in underground rocks and minerals. It is released by precipitation, weathering of rocks, and geothermal vents. The following process of sulfur cycle is: the sulfur is released by the weathering of rocks. This sulfur comes in contact with air and is converted into sulfates. The sulfates are taken up by plants and microbes and are converted into organic forms. This organic form of sulfur is then consumed by the animals through their food, and the sulfur moves in the food chain. When the animal die, some of the sulfur is released by decomposition while some enter the tissues of microbes. There are several natural sources such as volcanic eruptions, evaporation of water, and breakdown of organic material in swamps and release sulfur directly into the atmosphere. This sulfur falls on each with rainfall. There are steps of sulfur cycle. The following are the important steps, which are the decomposition of organic compounds, oxidation of hydrogen sulfide to elemental sulfur, oxidation of elemental sulfur, reduction of sulfates. Okay, so JC, I think you have gained so much information about biogeochemicals. You may now open your eyes and discover much more of it. We will see you in the next stream. Bye! Thank you.
Agay ka, nagatulog ko. Virtue na sad.